I want to thank you for you guys taking the time out of your day to attend that quarterly webinar that we host with great presenters and great topics. So without further ado, let's go through some, if I got the computer to work, would be great. Kind of logistics of today's webinar. You can see at the bottom of your screen that there is a chat box, or at the top of your screen, depending on how you're situated. This chat box is where you can put a question, and it will be moderated. Toward the end, we're going to leave some time for questions during the presentation itself. If there's an urgent one, our moderator is going to jump in and kind of tell us that there was a question from the floor, something that needed to be repeated or something that needed to be expanded. If time permitting, we're not able to respond to all the questions during the session, then what we'll do is we'll type them up and send them to the attendees at the end of the session. All right. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Paul van Metre. Is a great business owner, lots of passion for what he does, and I'm gonna have him kind of talk a little bit later about our how to use some of the tools in the production area and in the shop, in the front office and in the back office, on how to kind of melt all that together. Has been a machine shop owner for 17 years. I mean, Paul, instead of me doing the intro, why don't you do yours? It's probably much easier for you to do it.
Sure. Thank you, Francois. And thanks for having me here. It's fun to talk about this. I definitely have a passion for it. Yeah, I started a machine shop with my partners right out of college, and grew that, sold it a few years ago, and started the business we're in today, which is called ProShop. I also have a podcast called Machine Shop Mastery. I interview shop owners, try to distill their wisdom and advice to impart to others. I love being engaged with the manufacturing industry, and that's me in a nutshell.
I'm glad to have you on today, Paul. You guys are gonna be blown away when you listen to the stories later. As of myself, for those of you guys that don't know who I am, I'm the business owner here at GrowthHive, which we founded about four and change years ago. My passion is in strategy and business development, and what I've been doing at corporate for many years, and then now as an entrepreneur. I've been in the very front end of Industry 4.0. We didn't even call it that back then. It was not even called Wi-Fi when I started, so I'm dating myself here. But there are things we've been doing over the years that are absolutely phenomenal and led me to where we're at today. Is understanding that entire circle from end to finish. Board member, notably on the Alzheimer's Association, a patent holder. I do like cars, planes, and not train, but technology, for those that know what that movie is about. Car, planes, and trains, but that's kind of where my passion is, my hobbies are. The agenda we have for today, we're going to talk a little bit about instant gratification. That's a concept I kind of coined about 4 or 5 years ago. We saw it coming. That's kind of fun back then. Now it's a matter of survival. So let's define what that means. Then we're going to go very quickly through what we do best at GrowthHive, which is get known, get leads, and get conversions. Then let Paul kind of talk a little bit more about how do you deliver upon those? How do you wow your customers? So that's the path for today. Once again, for those of you guys just joined, you have a chat button on the Zoom thing. Use it, ask your questions as we go. We're going to moderate them and keep ranking. All right, instant gratification. What the heck is this? Is it a meme or a myth or both? Well, it is definitely no longer a myth, and it's probably going to get a meme status sooner than later. The way I explain this very quickly is over the past 10 to 15 years, for those of you guys that have followed this, you come home, you go on Amazon.com, eBay, Walmart, whatever, And you can shop with ease, meaning you know the inventory position, they have it on stock, they know the price, you know exactly when you get it. And guess what? If you're looking for parts to replace your pump, your car engine, work on your boat, whatever it is you do as a hobby, boom, you got instant gratification. If you're not happy, which happened to me quite a few times this year alone, because you can't find inventory, you can't find a person that has a good price value, then you go to the next, you go to the next, and you go to the next, and eventually you'll find somebody that meets your need. That's what we call instant gratification. At least that's the name I gave it. This is this idea that the people out there come back to work in the next day and they have to wait for 6 weeks for a quote. Come on, guys.
I have a perfect anecdote. A perfect anecdote for this. I was just out, and I know you love cars. I was just out working on my 1974 Fiat Spider. The shifter mechanism, the bushings were all worn out and broken. So I pulled up Google search. I searched for that. I found an eBay listing. They had good reviews. I bought it while I was sitting there in my car, and it's coming in a couple of days. This is like last night. So yeah, absolutely instant gratification.
Yeah, I have another story, and then we're going to move on center here. Another story is many years ago, we're hosting a bunch of friends and family for Thanksgiving at our house. And a few days before the event, one of our family members poured some cold water on a hot glass in the oven by mistake. The glass shatters, right? I'm like, oh, we need an oven for the turkey thing, right? So I went online and I found this thing called repairclinic.com. I think they still exist. And they told me where to find the label of the oven and go find where to read the part number, put it in there. I saw a video and look, it was like quite easy. The guy with the white coat was kind of holding the screwdrivers and whatnot. So I ordered the part. $150 later, 2 days later, my oven was up and running and we had a happy Thanksgiving. So instant gratification is at the center of the universe today. What is CX? Is customer experience, meaning from the journey of I have a need, I have a shifter that's broken into my 1974 car, I got an oven glass that's broken, I need a part for my engine, I need a part for my medical equipment, I need. And then if you're not in the conversation, you're not relevant. And that's the whole point of this conversation today. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to start with demographics. To me, this is kind of probably the hottest topic in our world right now. About half of the population is quote unquote millennials and Gen Z. And well, they kind of really never grew up with books and patience and other traits that we often associate with the people that have been there for a long time in our customer shops, in our own buying supply chain, offices. So one thing that shocked me when I did the research a few years ago and still valid today, because we update this every year, is about half of them do their research on social media. That is new. That is something that when I was working for Kennametal back in the days, it was 20, 10, 15%. Yeah, all right, we can pass on. But today, half of the conversation happened on social. Not that means it's going to become a lead, but at least there's a conversation. Then you have to convert them with web research. They come to you knowing more often than you do about your product. Oh, I need this extension made of stainless steel that connects with a 1/4 inch, and that's this, and male and stainless, and then on this, it's, the copper thing, and it's threaded that, and that. They know exactly what they want. If you don't have it, they go to next. You see the pattern here? I mean, loyalty, maybe, right? But make it the work easy to find and buy is what we're talking about here. So I want to just glance on this slide very quickly. There's two drivers. We talked about the demographics. There's also a technology thing. Since 2005, apparently, we're in the digital economy. That's not me, that's just the research out there. That means the technology is making it super simple. Look, about 20, 30 people here today talking about this on a computer, on a Zoom thing. John asked me 15 years ago, I just had my first BlackBerry. So the technology has really taken it to the next level, and it makes this instant gratification ever more complex because I want it now. Actually, given the best tools that are at their disposal out there right now, planning for production is still something that's kind of last minute. So you want to be on the front end receiving of these requests for quotes and be ready to answer right away. So I'm going to take a detour and get to the get known, get leads, get conversion thing very quickly. That's what we do at GrowthHive day in and day out. So we have to deal with multiple people. We talked about demographics. I'm going to add a layer of complexity. It's called personas. I got to talk to a manager that kind of needs to make 10,000 parts a month. That's all he or she cares about. I got a specifier. That's the name I give them to the engineering community. They specify stuff. They talk in inches or thousands of inches or microns or, fittings and coatings and norms and specs. And then you have a buyer. I hope I'm not going to have too many of those on the call today, but sometimes, and most of the time, when we got buyer engaged into the conversation, this is all about, hey, I got part number 1, 2, 3. Where do I buy this? And what's the best price for this commodity thing number XYZ? So the conversations are kind of different between the different personas about what it is they want. And the art is to talk to them efficiently at the same time. And we call that smart communication or smart messaging. This is complex. I'm going to navigate that quickly. You have a web page. That's great. But we saw that 47% of the guys or girls are looking for ideas on social. So smart reaching is where you want to be thinking about getting known, and smart messaging is being heard. We do this through landing pages. There's one for aerospace, one for medical, one for Arkansas, one for Mexico. And you go on and on and on, having landing pages where people technically land, and we speak your language, not mine, yours. And that's very important. And to do that effectively, we spend a ton of time with the contacts database, the persona, the segmentation, and so forth. Where you want to be is on the right side. You want to buy, you want to talk, you want to engage. Okay. So smart messaging, smart reaching is how you get known. And furthermore, if you guys are interested in all that, I can speak for hours, but not today. This is about inbound, SEO, SCM, outbounds. These are like marketing jargon terms, but essentially this idea today, the people want to be captivated by what you do, not sold on what you have. You see the difference? They need to be interested in your brand. They need to want to know what you're doing and why you're doing it and what should I do to get there. Not, I need this. Well, I got a PIA in front of me, right? It's a product. It's a feature.
I think there's another component to this, Francois, that is really relevant today. I've heard this from a lot of our customers that a lot of the buyers out there today are very young, kind of like you were talking about. They're on social, but a lot of them aren't as familiar with what they're buying. Like they're straight out of business school or something, and they're thrown into this purchasing situation, and they don't know a mill from a lathe, from a gun drill to a grinding machine, right? And so education, I think, is also really important. And I've seen a lot of customers, and I think we'll feature one later, that's done a great job of just educating, like putting out informational content of what is a milled part, what is a turned part, what are different materials, tolerances, just to help educate these younger and less experienced people. And if you become recognized as an expert in that and someone they can rely on, they're going to come to you first. Yeah.
And it spreads.
Absolutely.
It spreads like mushrooms. Yeah, I'm not allowed to speak.
And you're adding value. You're adding value to them. That's the key message, I guess.
That's right. All right. Getting leads frankly speaking, and I'm not going to oversell it, this is not the most difficult part of the whole scenario here. Again, very complicated slide. You guys talk to me later about that. We do this through what we call marketing automation. This is a term that might be foreign to many of you out there. This is this idea that we can dissociate exactly who you are and serving you your message instead of one shoe fits all, which we know doesn't work. So same kind of thing. I'm not going to go too long on this, but what we work with as many of our customers in step one toward the left. I hope this is kind of, my finger points to the right place on your screen. The strategy is so critical, specifically in industrials where we work, and hopefully many of you participate. If you try to be very wide and shallow, so you're going to have a message that goes out to everybody on the billboard on I-76. Well, you're going to get the people traveling on I-76 when they need to get a hamburger, but that's not the strategy. The strategy is, who do you want to target, which industry, which location, which persona, and how do we go deep in there, not wide and shallow. Messaging goes along with that, which is step two. Landing pages is the receptacle. Then we launch the campaigns for about 90 days because we hit saturations after that. So we get, we know we do 30 days, then another one, then another one. We typically have 3 running in parallel, and then process leads, which we're going to talk about with Paul in a much deeper way, because that's where the rub hit the road. The conversion is the hard part. We find that out with every single of our customers. I said earlier that if I don't find what I need within seconds, what do? I go to next and next and next and next. Guess what? I want to bet that some of your customers doing the same. If they don't talk, that don't mean they're not interested. If they don't talk, that means they found somebody else. So you need to be in the conversation. That's where we started, was get known. You got to be part of the conversation. That's what we just talked about with landing pages, and now you got to close and get them home. And if your quotation, I'm taking statistics from one of our partners here. If you get a quote out within the hours, you got 82% chances of getting the work. That's the stats, 82%. If you wait another 23 hours, it drops down to below 40%. If you wait another 4 days, 5 days total, it drops like to 7% chances of getting the order. So you worked a day or 2 or 3 or 5 for nothing. So the whole equation has to be reversed. How do I get quoted faster? And what we found out is, in our world, buying a machine of $2 million is like a very simple decision. Let's do it. We got the part, right? We got the order. I can make a $2 million decision to buy a machine within weeks. And I can get the financing done, and I'm going to work odd hours to get the contract signed. But when it comes to kind of figuring out what's happening in my shop, it's a little harder. So many of the places I started with 3 or 4 years ago, now it's a little better, but it still is out there. We engineer everything. We got to be sure it's going to be 2 hours and 16 minutes in cycle time. It's going to use that mill machine, that VTL, that thing, that whatnot. And we're going to use the tools from XYZ brand. I'm not going to name the brands because I got personal preferences here. In fact, you've created a ton of NVA, which is non-value added. I'm a black belt guy. So you got a ton of NVA that you created, a bunch of ENVA, which is essential but non-value added because no one wants to pay for it. Takes days, sometimes weeks. Trivia. I once flew to Belfast to participate into a bid on a new airplane program. We were given 10 weeks to come back and present our offer. We came back precisely 9 weeks and change in time for the bidding. And we was told by the prospect, the client, that our competitors was already doing testing on the floor. Hang on a minute.
Oh, wow.
That was a long and expensive trip and a lot of engineering to create that quote where we could have been in the ballpark. I'm not saying precise, but in the ballpark, and 90% of the time. So educated quotes, minutes, hours, removes a lot of ENVA. But to do that, you gotta have some basic understanding. And I spent a lot of my career on this thing, was MT Connect and Umati and others. You got to network your machines, which most of the folks now have. You have to have your machine compliant with data acquisition. You have to have an ERP 2.0. That's the name I gave it, right? Which is not the Microsoft DOS 3.1 version with blue screens and white fields. That is not cool no more. And then you got to have this quote software, that instant thing. So what's my capability? What's my availability? What's my real-time data set? What's my capacity? What should be my price? People think about pricing as a linear thing. I need to make 35% margin. That's not kind of how it works anymore. You have to do demand pricing. So at this point, I'm going to turn to Paul and have him take us somewhat home with what can be done.
Sure. So you said that the conversion was the hard part, and I agree that is very hard. But I think actually delivering is even harder because there's so many details to get right and possibly get wrong. So you can just jump past this one right here. So one of the things that over the course of my career, both in the machine shop business and now today in software, is customers, kind of like you were saying, Francois, you know, the theme of this whole thing, instant gratification. They also want a very consistent and reliable experience, right? When they go to McDonald's, they know that if they're going to order their favorite, you know, Big Mac and fries, that no matter what state they are, no matter which place they go, it's pretty much going to be the same. And people are programmed to want that consistent experience. They don't want variability. So bringing it back to manufacturing, right? When they're, you know, sending in an RFQ, of course, they want that quote back within an hour because they're going to make their quick decision, especially right now with demand being as high as it is. Yep. Even if you're 10, 20% higher than anyone else, you get your quote in first, there's a much higher chance you're going to win that business. And I'll just extra point out on that point, you know, if you wait a few days later and you know, take an hour or two to create that quote, not only have you lost the job, but you just wasted that couple hours of time, right? The chance of you winning it was so low, but you still spent your time doing it. So that's even doubly important to get that in soon. But the customer wants that quick response. They want, you know, a nice looking quote page or quote. When they place the order with you, they want consistent, you know, thank you very much for your order. You know, we'll confirm this within 24 hours or 12 hours or whatever it is that you can do, the sooner the better. They want consistent status updates. They want, you know, very consistent paperwork. They want communication the way they like it. You know, maybe you have buyers out there that say, I want you to text me status updates, right? Or I want them by email, or I want them, you know, whatever way that they want them. You might even have buyers that say, you know, IG, send me a DM on IG for my status updates. You know, whatever it is that they want, you need to understand what that buyer wants and deliver a consistent experience, right? If you went to McDonald's and got a totally different thing from one location to the next, you wouldn't be going back. So that is a key point about building a business with repeatable processes to deliver that consistent experience. So you can jump to the next one. So, and we believe that the way to do that is not by just training everyone to do it the right way. You can certainly and should train your folks to deliver that a consistent experience, but you really need to do it by building consistent business processes, right? So this could be in any number of different ways. Obviously, ERP is a great way to build processes because you can kind of program and design the process to be very consistent. You could do the same thing with Google Docs. You could do it with paper even, but the idea is that everyone in your team knows exactly how to communicate, how to respond, how to you know, build those internal systems so that your customer is always getting that consistent experience, right? If you say we're going to confirm every order within 1 hour, or acknowledge the order within 1 hour of order placement, then you got to build a system to make sure that happens, right? If you do that 8 times out of 10, and then on the 9th and 10th time, you wait 6 hours, your customer's gonna be like, what's going on? I normally get my confirmation right away. Something must be going on over there. That gives me a sense of unease. Maybe I'm gonna, next time ask this other supplier to quote as well, right? So, and I'd also argue that in today's market, every shop can go buy the fanciest machines.
Yeah.
Equipment is not going to impress anyone anymore. You need to wow your customers, not only with what you actually deliver, but with your business processes. I've had buyers very experienced, decades in the industry, buying machined parts, that say when they walk into a customer or to a vendor, excuse me, when they walk into a vendor's shop, within less than 5 minutes, they can just smell if there's chaos behind the scenes, right? And so if you have really excellent processes, getting rid of that chaos, you need to highlight those and show them this is how we ensure consistent performance to your requirements. And that goes a long, long way in giving them the confidence to continue to work with you. So you can jump to the next slide. So very quickly on these ones, kind of like I already alluded to, making sure that you are, very quickly responding. I think hyper communication, hyper responsiveness is really critical in this day and age, not only in sending those quotes in quickly, but with everything, right? If they call you for a status update, they don't want you to, hang up and call them back later in the day or the next day because you had to go out to the factory to figure out where their job was. Ideally, you should be able to give them that on the phone while you're talking, right? Or respond to their email within 5 minutes with a status. So
that reminds me of something.
Yeah.
But some of you guys know this. I started my career in Honeywell in France, in many positions, and for a couple of years I had a customer service area. And one of the things we've written on our wall: if the phone rings, you failed.
Right.
Just pose on that for a second. If the phone rings, you failed because you have not taken the proactive steps to inform your customer about any impending changes to the order. Either it's a new order, it's a change, it's engineering changes, some supply issues, some quality issues. Things will happen. I mean, it's normal. But that you don't continuously inform your customers about these sorts of things. I think you said hyper communicate, and I totally accept and agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. You can jump to the next one. So when it relates to actually making sure you can deliver to what they want, I think there's an incredible importance of being very proactive in your planning processes when you get those new orders. And we would argue, of course, being advocates of going totally paperless, that if you have paper-based processes, it is virtually impossible to kick off all your critical things at the same time, because in many cases, you're relying on a physical job traveler to move between people's desks from order entry to planning to procurement to quality to inspection or whatever. And people sometimes don't even know there's a job to work on until that physical piece of paper shows up on their desk. So, and so that in conjunction with, if you have critical lead time things like special tooling or special inspection gauges, making sure all that stuff starts to get kicked off in parallel with whatever mechanisms you can. We often, back in our shop days, we called it a sales tie-in, where the sales team would, and the estimating department would, anything that they knew that was particularly out of the ordinary, they would make sure that the planning department or the planner knew that immediately, right? And maybe you get quality involved to make sure, hey, do we have this special, this special thread gauge? No, we don't. All right, let's make sure we get it, because all too often shops will go to set up a job or go to inspect a job, and at that point they realize they don't have something they need,
Mhm.
And that is just going to tank the whole process.
Just a quick walk back to the future kind of thing. When we launched software called Novo back in the days at Keno, which was hyper selective product based on your machine and whatnot, I ran a sort of a survey at one of the events of the programmers, the CAM programmers.
Yep.
And we had them captive with us for about an hour, chatting about all kinds of topics. And one of them was, where do you spend most of your time finding stuff in the shop? So maybe you can talk a little bit about what we could do with the technology today to trace like gauges. You mentioned gauges. That was one of the biggest things.
Sure.
Tooling, custom tools, maybe setters, presetters, everything that you need to do the job. It feels though that the current technology or some of the mechanism or processes used by many, we just don't know what we got and what degree of calibration it is at or whatever is required. So that's my electronic days with calibration.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And sorry, there's a train going by down below my office. I mean, all those things are super critical. And in our opinion, traditional ERPs don't do things like help you manage gauge calibration and preventative maintenance and cutting tool management. And when we, in our own shop, when we were looking for software to help run the shop, we ran into that same exact problem. They just, the existing systems out the market just didn't help us with any of those aspects. They're like, yeah, that's important, sure, but you're going to do that on spreadsheets or some other, secondary software. And that just wasn't acceptable to us. So we started building this thing for ourselves that eventually became ProShop. But so, we integrate that in. So, we have specific cutting tool management. So you can set a sort of a tool bomb, right, on your part. So when you get an order, I need these 20 tools, and procurement can see the inventory you have on those tools already and know which vendors to buy them from, and very quickly make sure everything is coming and it'll arrive on time. And then when you get to something like inspection, making sure that you have all the gauges you need and they're calibrated and they're not expired. And when the time comes that they do expire, right, there's a full built-in process for making sure they do get recalibrated on time. And that's what I mean by selling and showing your customers your process, right? If you show them, yeah, if we, when we get your order, this is how we make sure we have all the cutting tools on hand, all the materials are going to arrive on time. We can see that and make sure it's all ready before we start the job. This is how we are going to guarantee that we have great quality and inspection frequencies, and we're checking our process, making sure it's stable and documented. If they see that in a digital paperless system, as opposed to someone that has a 3-ring binder with, chicken scratch notes of which caliper was calibrated when, that's not an impressive, kind of arrangement. So yeah, I do agree that all those little details are really important. And when you don't have seamless ways to manage them, they will come bite you in the butt in the end. So
I think I can safely quote that, and I've been continuously doing this in the shops I'm privileged to work with. It's about 20-30% of the time is searching for stuff. 20 to 30%
oh
of
yes,
the time
absolutely
searching for stuff. What could we do with 20% more capacity? Can we just imagine for a second what that looks like?
Sure. It's huge. Yeah, and that's pretty much exactly when we poll our customers, what percentage of throughput increases are you seeing? There's 25%. That is the most common answer we see. 25% more throughput, 25% more spindle time. And part of that comes from reduced setup. When you're searching for something, your setup isn't actually progressing, right? Mm-hmm. And when companies organize everything they need for their setups, it is super common to get a 50% reduction in setup times. So
50%.
50%. That is common. That is And we have a recorded webinar that we could probably include in this recording about reducing your setup by 50%.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of savings. All right.
So I've already talked about all this already, but just underscoring being proactive is so, so important. When we talk about this concept with companies that haven't bought into the mindset yet, they often say, I don't have time to do that up front, right? I got this order, I'm just going to push it out to the shop really quick, get it to the programmers, whatever. So you don't have time to take an extra 10% or 20% up front, but you do have time to wait for 24 hours when you overnight ship, a special gauge or a special end mill later because you don't have it up front. Yeah, you're spending that money. Your machines are sitting idle. Maybe you have a higher scrap rate because you didn't put in a really detailed inspection process and you started making some bad parts. Or you didn't get the mil spec perfectly right on your outside process and your anodizer did it wrong. And now you got to strip the parts and get them redone. Right. So people never have enough time to do it right the first time, but they always have enough time to redo it later. And it's a little bit of a catch-22. You got to spend the time to start freeing up your time later. But I promise you the ROI on your time investment to be more proactive up front is 5-10 times on the backside. So it will just eliminate all sorts of firefighting, and scrambling if you really intentionally become proactive. And that largely comes down to building those systems. So you always do it repeatable, consistent way, and cover all your bases. So you're eliminating those fires before they even start.
So if you're a job shop and then you're truly a job shop in our definition, right? Like maybe the one you own in the very early days, where you kind of take what you can.
Sure.
And how does that manifest itself, the process documentation in a true workshop environment versus a production shop?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously more dynamic in a job shop. Every job is brand new, or maybe you've seen it once before, but it's not like a consistent flow of the same type of work. But it doesn't mean you can't be very consistent with your process, right? You get a brand new job you've never seen before. You still want to, thoroughly, review the requirements, look at what the customer is asking for, make sure, you've checked off the boxes. And I'm a huge fan of checklists. Read the Checklist Manifesto if you need a book to reinforce why that's so important. Yeah.
When you're flying, you have to have a checklist. There's no.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And quite honestly, that concept, that's what inspired that book. It was written by a gentleman named Atul Gawande, and he was a medical researcher, doctor. And he said, they do these pre-flight checklists in airplanes. Why don't we do that for surgeries? And because they just didn't back in the day. So they did some research, they did some studies, and they found that when they put in a pre-surgery checklist, the chance of death because of an accident or a mistake dropped by like 47%.
Holy cow.
Right. So we expect, not that machining is quite as complex as brain surgery, but it is a very complex process, especially in job shop work where you're constantly doing new stuff all the time. So starting, expecting our machinists and our programmers and everyone out on the shop floor to get it perfectly every time without making mistakes, without giving them a documented checklisted process, it's an unrealistic expectation. So anyway, I know I'm getting in the weeds, but taking that concept, applying it to a job shop where every job is brand new, still can reap enormous benefits in making sure that you get things running more smoothly in your shop. And like I said, stopping the fires from starting before they even start, by being more consistent, having more process driven, even in a job shop environment. It's totally doable. And then you got to communicate all that to your customers, right? Like you said, if you are running late, you got to tell them in advance. You cannot wait for them to call you up and say, hey, where's my parts, right? If that happens, then you truly have failed.
Yep.
So, And of course, all of that work is just so much harder when things are on paper or buried in dozens of different spreadsheets. So we are huge advocates of that ERP 2.0 concept, ideally browser-based, in our opinion, making sure that sort of data democratization, to use a term, that people out on the shop floor can get all the information they need very quickly. They can share information very quickly back with the office. And when everything is in one central system designed to help you excel and meet your clients' expectations, it just helps you to do that much easier than if you're literally running around 30% of your time trying to find a job traveler, trying to find the inspection report, trying to find a tool, trying to find the material. So definitely get things off of spreadsheets and paper. They're your biggest enemy.
So Paul, I think I'm going to deviate from my early rules about Q&A, but there's a couple of questions that are somewhat timely to what you're describing right now.
Sure.
Let's go backwards in the checklist for just a second. And there's a question, I'm just going to read it out. What is the expectation for managing the checklist? Does one person manages it or multiple people?
So first of all, I think the checklist should be designed by everyone that's involved in the process. But ultimately, in our opinion, the checklist needs to be checked off by multiple people, depending on where they are in the process. So for us, in our system, we call it the pre-processing checklist. And there are sections of it. So there's a section that is designed for, order entry, contract review, procurement, sort of more of that front end office type of thing. Making sure, again, all those key things are kicked off, materials, you have the correct revision of the drawing, right? You've confirmed the dates with your customer, you've checked your capacity planning. Then there's a section that will be probably for quality planning, depending on what industry and how those inspection requirements are. Let's say you're an aerospace shop and you need to do your AS9102 report, so balloon tagging your drawing, coming up with your inspection plan, that would be a different person signing off those segments. And then you get into your CNC programming. That's clearly going to be a different person. That's the CNC programmer or programmers. If you have multiple people doing like mill and lathe or laser or whatever, right? So those people would check off those. And then ultimately you're going to have people on the shop floor checking off that the jobs are kitted, prepped, everything's ready to go. So when you go to set up that job, you have everything you want. It would be the goal to have someone walk up to a machine with a fully kitted job, start their setup, and never have to leave the machine before they have their first good part off the machine, right? If you leave to go find something, you've already failed your setup, right? That is just going to cause spindle downtime, waste, longer setup times, your schedule is going to start slipping. So the goal is to show up at the machine, get your first part out as fast as possible. So anyway, long story short, I think everyone has to be involved in checking off those checklist items based on the particular role they're playing in that value stream within your business. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm re-looking at the question, and I may have one little twist to it.
Sure.
I think what I learned about the ERPs and yours in particular is that these checklists can evolve over time. We find something that needs to be added because we forgot this. So for example, in our shop, we do QMS every Friday afternoon. Take a glass of whiskey and talk about what went wrong during the week and how do we learn from those and then not repeat them. This is a great way to, I don't know if the question was more about who owns the checklist, but everyone owns the checklist, but one, if you think about the beginning of a relationship in a shop and a customer, sales and admin, this is the start point. We're putting the order into the system. We're looking at kind of, do we have everything? You kick off a workflow from there in ERP, goes to several handoffs, and then you got to the machine. And I think the key word I heard from Paul is everything's kitted, everything's there. I just have to put everything into my machine. Let's walk back from this for a second. That doesn't happen very often, does it?
That all
When
comes together
everything's
smoothly.
there. Yeah. No,
It depends on the
in
shop.
real life.
For some, it happens reliably all the time. For most, it doesn't happen.
Great. That's what I wanted to hear. So
Yeah.
keep things out of spreadsheets and off paper. That's the how. The checklist is essentially the what, that glue that kind of hangs
Yep.
everything up. In my world as a pilot, when you're pilot in command, you're the one that has to check everything on the checklist.
Sure.
Or you're
Yeah,
like
I do believe what you're getting to, that some person needs to own the checklist. They need to be
Right.
ultimately responsible. And in my opinion, that would be the project manager for that work order. But they're not going through and checking off that the programmer has done their feeds and speed check and they've checked all their drill tap depths. You know, that is for the programmer to do themselves. And
that's
hopefully,
a job specific task.
Yeah, absolutely. And to go back to another point you're making, the checklist should absolutely evolve over time. But just as importantly, and we've built this into our software, the checklist should be customized based on the job that you're doing. So if you get a brand new job you've never done before, you're going to have a much longer list of things to check than if you're doing a repeat job that you've done 4 or 5 times, right? If you're remaking the same parts at the same rev, you don't need to program it again, right? Unless possibly there's feedback from last time you did it that your program's not very efficient. But so there's a time equation there. But it's a much more condensed checklist if you're doing a job that you've done before, or if it's a prototype job that doesn't have all the quality reporting requirements of, you know, an AS9100 first article job, right? That will require more checklist items. And so our checklist automatically evolves based on what type of work order you're running.
That's nice. Moving on a bit because we have about 10 minutes left and I want to leave some time for questions. So,
yep. So, I mean, this is kind of obvious, you know, you got to deliver to your commitments, right? If you are not delivering on time or there's something wrong with the parts, you're not going to survive as a vendor very long with that customer, right? So it's kind of the benchmark at this point. You know, the minimum is you got to be on time with good parts and good paperwork. You know, even if you deliver good parts, but your customer has to call you and say, hey, can you please send the material certs that didn't come with the delivery? Or can you send the inspection report? If they have to ask you for anything, that's just additional friction and time that they don't have time to deal with and they don't want to deal with. So again, coming back to building consistent systems, knowing which paperwork each individual customer wants and making sure you deliver it to them automatically is really important.
Yep. Well said. All right, conclusions.
Yeah, this is an example, this is a case study of a customer of ours that does exactly what we've been talking about this whole webinar, right? On the front end side, they are using HubSpot in this case to do marketing automation. They're using paperless parts to do instant quoting. They are hyper responsive with their communication. They're using ProShop to manage all their jobs, do their training, have very consistent processes. And, you know, in the last couple of years, and if you click one more time, you know, they have grown 75%. I think that should come on the screen if you click again, Francois. They've grown 75% in just, I think, the last 2 years since we started working with them. So just a great example of put all those pieces in place, making sure it flows smoothly together, and you can get just incredible results.
That's a good slide. Yep, and you and I talked about it before as well. Since we met, there's a lot of case studies that are along the same things, and just to kind of consolidate that, you and I put this together. What are the 5 things you need to monetize onto this instant gratification trend. So maybe you can expand on that, Paul.
Sure. Well, the first three are, kind of on what you specialize in. Making sure you have the systems in place to make sure you can find, companies can find you in the marketplace, with your branding, with your positioning, with your marketing, with your, trying to be a resource, provide value, and making sure that when you do have inquiries, you have a way to understand their needs and show up to deliver that to them. Again, whether that's one of those millennial buyers that really doesn't understand machining all that well and could use some assistance in knowing, what exactly they're buying from you, to ultimately, having more back-end systems to make sure you're delivering on time, good quality, on good paperwork, and then using those systems to even sell to your customers, show them that you are incredibly organized, show them that you can consistently deliver on their requirements, because buyers are really in the business of reducing risk, right? They don't want to put their company at risk because their vendor isn't delivering something that you have promised them. A great example, we have a lot of clients that do work for SpaceX. I was just on a call recently with them. They are building 10 Raptor engines per week, right? Thousands of machines parts in every single engine, very complex supply chain. If they don't, get that bracket, that widget, that housing, that manifold, 10 of them per week, their whole schedule is gone to hell, right? Excuse my French, but so it's just so important that you can deliver consistent ways to get yourself known and then give them the confidence that you are the least risky proposition.
Absolutely. Well said, Paul. Thank you so much to be with us this afternoon. Round of applause, if we could, to Paul and his team, because you guys are doing some superb work out there. So I do have.
Should we get to the Q&A, the last couple of questions?
Yes, that's what I want to go to. The first one is kind of more into your will of the house. How affordable are ERP systems to smaller shops? Is price becoming a less of a barrier these days?
I mean, I certainly think so, especially with subscription type software. Our system, and I can't speak for all of them, but and we have customers, quite honestly, that are one-person shops that think that the value that they get is far in excess of what they spend on it every day or every month. But for example, and we're huge advocates of everyone in the shop, including the shop floor people, engaging with the ERP/shop management /QMS type of system. But it's the equivalent of giving someone about a 25-cent or 30-cent raise. If you can get 25% more throughput on your shop floor, if you can cut your setup times by 50%, if you can, do all the things that a system can help you do, by giving someone, a 25-cent raise, is that worth it to you, right? And for most folks, the clear, it's an absolute no-brainer. But I think more importantly, it's also to look at the opportunity costs of not investing in good software. An example would be, you're getting bigger, things are getting more complex, your jobs are starting to get late, so you hire an expediter, right? You have someone whose sole job is to just run around and try to facilitate getting jobs out the door, getting unstuck from queues. So you're going to spend, $40,000-$50,000 a year on a person when you could spend, a quarter of that on some software and have the same result, right? And we've had clients that eliminated, those positions. We've also had clients that saved so much money on their UPS overnight shipping charges that it paid for the software entirely, right? And then
I can't believe this
because people just throw money at the problem in the form of expedites and people and things of that nature, but they don't proactively invest to make those systems better. So
Right.
yes, it can be
Going
very
to the
affordable,
next-
Todd. Thanks for the question.
Well, it's pays for itself. I think that's the key word. The one question probably for our group here at GrowthHive, but jump in if you feel you could. How important do you think my brand is for my company? Meaning, if we do all of this well, will not only be an obvious choice for our customer, but for prospects as well. Yes, and there is always an end. I was told not to use the word but, so I'm going to use the word and. Yes, and if you do all these very well, meaning you get known, you own the conversations, you get leads, people kind of come to you, and you get some conversions, meaning some out of the hundreds that's going to come to you with question will have an order for you. Then you deliver 100% of the time, 100% right. Then, excuse me. Then yes, over time, you're gonna get more prospect to find you. The old days, we used to say this is word of mouth. And people talk about you and says, you got to talk to the French guy, you got to talk to the Pole guy, right? So word of mouth is still very active in our markets, and things become viral into the social media. Some posts of mine get 3,000 views for whatever reason I don't understand, and some others get 100 views. So these are very complex questions. And if you do all this well, yes, you will get some traction. We saw a shop earlier on 2 or 3 slides ago that has done it correctly and is now growing at a clip of about 75% over 2 years. It's a CAGR of 30 some odd percent. So that's overwhelming, positive. Is it a guarantee? No, because still a lot of sweat is required to get things done right. But the tools have helped tremendously. Paul, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that's, every good company out there works very hard on their brand, making sure that you are known for excellence. You have a consistent message, again, coming back to that consistency. Consumers just want that. And they want to know that they're working with vendors and suppliers that are just excellent. And so it's your job to communicate the fact that you are. And if every, email you send out has different fonts and, your logo's in a different spot, they're going to be like, these people aren't really good at the details. How good are they going to be at making my parts down to a 10th, right? So I think that's an important factor. And I'm cognizant of the time, we're already at the hour. I wanted to just quickly address Nick's question about the barriers to shop adopting a new ERP. I think there's 2 main barriers. For the leaders, it's finding the time to do it, right? Especially shops right now, they are working 12, 15-hour days, just trying to get work out the door. How can you possibly spend an extra few hours a week to do training and implementation? But, basically, again, sort of catch-22, you have to find the time, or else you'll never get out of that vicious cycle of always just being in your business, late on things, scrambling all the time. The second one would be making sure that your team is bought in and isn't digging in their heels, right? If you are a shop that has not traditionally done things like time tracking, and all of a sudden, as part of an ERP, you want accurate job costing, you want accurate scheduling, so you have to have them do time tracking. That can be a big barrier. But I think the key is the way that you deliver the message of why it's important, right? You're not trying to ask them because you want to big brother them and beat them down if they're taking too long. The key is you are trying to get information to help the company succeed, help you get your pricing accurate, help you be on-time delivery. And if your company thrives because you are dialing in those processes, then that will benefit your employees, right? You can afford to give better benefits, more paid time off, better raises, all those things. So it's just, I think that the messaging yeah, that's just so important, and finding the time and investing even when you have your long days, because without investing in that, you're just going to be in the same rat race as ever.
Super. Again, thanks, Paul. Thanks everyone for joining us today. This will be live on the web in a few minutes, and we can review the recordings as your registration will link you to it. And talk to you all back in about a quarter.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Take care.